Best way to introduce you would be Jim Stogdill. Are you a CTO at Accenture? Is that a fair way to say it?
No longer still a CTO, but it's a different role now.
Okay,
but,
what's the role?
These days I'm building our Hadoop and emerging data platforms practice.
Okay, and why are you building a Hadoop and emerging data platforms practice?
It's highly interesting to the corporate enterprise these days, so it's finding its way out of the web into other environments.
This is something I've heard from a number of people today in terms of the growing interest from corporations, from big businesses, in terms of using their data better and the open data that's available on the internet and that's coming out of mobile, location, social, etc. What's the business proposition for doing that?
I think there's a couple things, and people are still figuring it out, and it varies very much by different domain. But a big part of it is recognizing that there is data inside the enterprise that has been largely ignored for, say, 50 years without exaggeration. The goal of internal IT has been essentially figuring out what transactions happened and making them available to the outside, to close the books and do those kinds of things. It was a recording kind of thing. People are realizing there's a lot of other things you can do with data, and if you take that core of transactional information that you've already stored and that you've done in traditional ways with enterprise data warehouses, et cetera, and begin to combine it with other things, voice response records, call records, external data sources, as you commented, suddenly you can use it as a lever to transition IT from a cost center that reported on what was happening to part of the profit engine of an organization.
When you think about making that transition, are the architectures that large businesses have created, the stack that they have right now, is that up to that challenge? And if so, what are the needs for improvement? And if not, what's next?
Well, I think it's a good question, and there's no real answer yet. What I'd say is an analogy I use is, for many years, when it comes to data inside the organization, we've sort of thought about, think of the third normal form, right? Everybody knows what that is for a database. Almost nobody ever achieves it because of performance and other practical reasons. At the sort of enterprise scale, there's been sort of this equivalent of third normal form. You have your online transaction processing where the actual transactions happen. You have enterprise data warehouse, and in between you may have operational data stores. Most organizations are much more complex than that, but that picture, we generally understand and acknowledge that it's sort of what we think we do. With the advent of these other technologies, things like Hadoop, other sources of data, unstructured data in particular coming into the organization, the picture of what that looks like, what this new sort of normal that we aspire to, isn't exactly clear yet, and it'll probably be a little bit different in different organizations. So companies that have a strong web presence and they're trying to integrate it with what happens in stores, or for example in retail, might end up with a slightly different sort of normative idea than other organizations. But that's very much in transition right now.
And last question here, I don't want to keep you too long. You mentioned Hadoop, right? Is Hadoop something that every organization can put to use, or are there different considerations depending upon the size, scale, vertical, et cetera?
I think it's going to be really widely used. People are looking to continue to leverage their existing investments in business intelligence and existing enterprise data warehouse kind of tools. But they're looking, generally what we're seeing is people looking at how do they front end that with unstructured data, and they need a mechanism to both sort of process that unstructured data into something that can be usable downstream in a traditional data warehouse. And also there's just questions they can't answer outside of that. And the last thing I'll mention is one area that we're seeing a fair amount of interest in is the idea of using Hadoop and things like that as a mechanism for getting much more agile in the data space inside the environment. Because in a data warehouse I have to know my schema before I can even put data in it. It tends to repel data, as the MAD paper sort of has laid out. Corporate enterprises are realizing that Hadoop might be a way to short circuit some of that, get data into the environment much more rapidly, and then develop schema and insight over time rather than having to have it all figured out before you get started.
Well, long and interesting path ahead, and interesting week ahead too. Really looking forward to seeing what happens else in this conference, and hope I get to see some more of you too. All right, thanks, Jim.